parties are so insignificant, yet you say they have to play hardball. Why do they have to play hardball in this way if third parties are so insignificant? And when are they going to have to face the challengers in public forum on national debate and such?
Thank you very much. Chris?
If the control of money over the electoral process isn't reversed very soon, I think it will be calamitous for democracy. I think you'd have to make 3 or 4 reforms immediately to have a chance of saving it. Obviously, you have to have free television advertising, equal time for candidates. I think you'd also have to have a ban on commercial opinion polls during the electoral process. From the time an election was called till it was held, it would be forbidden to have opinion polls. And I think you'd have to have compulsory voting, as well as a ban on, a limit on campaign spending. I mean, only then, I think, could the idea that the voter in the booth is sovereign, as opposed to, as you found yourself, merely the object of a process of salesmanship, be restored to democracy. Without that, it's an empty, it's more like a plebiscite than an election.
Can you vote in American elections?
No.
Still a British citizen?
Yeah.
Wlady?
Well, Mr. Hitchens' call for reforms, I think, are part of the problem. The more reforms we have, the more problems arise as a result. And I think what he's advocating almost, I think, would bring about elections East European style, in which you have kind of mandated electoral procedures, mandated by the government. This is the government we're supposed to be electing, and not one that is telling us how we should be voting. So I think the fewer controls, the fewer regulations, the fewer reforms we have as far as voting is concerned, the better off we'll be.
Wlady Placzynski is the managing editor of this publication, which is called The American Spectator. You'll see it on your screen there in just a moment. And our other special guest this morning is a columnist with The Nation magazine, which looks like this, at least in the March 5th edition. The colors change from week to week. And our next call comes from Los Angeles, California. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to take 2 minutes of your time. I'm coming from Iran, and I know all the backgrounds of the American administration in Iran. I'm going to just take 2 minutes and brief you all about it.
Okay, make it about a minute.
Okay. Iranian ambassador, through the Shah of Iran, spent $5 million, donate $5 million for Gerald Ford for his campaign, which didn't success. Then Carter administration wanted to put the Shah down. That's what people in Iran, they believe. So they changed the regime to the Carter. Very last minute, when Carter was going and Reagan was coming on, the Persian Iranian government, mullahs, they spent whole 24 hours discussing about the hostages because they had a deal with Reagan to give it back on his very first minute in the office. And then Reagan announced on 1986, in the summer of 1986, that Iran country is not Iran government, is not a hostage, is not a terrorist government, because they were dealing with Iran.
Caller, get to the point, please.
Okay. When everybody in Iran, through the mullahs, they're burning American flag, they're shouting down with America, Reagan is sending a plane full of arms, a piece of cake, and a Bible with his signature on it, and a pistol as a gift to mullahs. What do you call it? Is it a begging? Is it a principle? Well, they're putting Reagan down in every street in Iran, and then he's begging for them.
Okay, I'm going to let him go and see if anybody wants to comment on anything he said.
Well, English isn't the gentleman's first language, but I think I saw the point he was trying to make. There is a case for believing that the arms deal with Iran that we now know about was a payoff for a deal we didn't know about, and that deal was made to fix the 1980 election. That it was a deal whereby, if the Ayatollah kept the American diplomatic hostages and denied a victory to Jimmy Carter thereby, he would be rewarded with American weapons when Reagan was elected.
You think there's a deal?
There's a great deal of evidence that did happen. I can rehearse some of it again if you like.
Wlady?
No, again, I think this is just almost pure speculation and invention. The Ayatollah releases hostages, the Ayatollah takes hostages. Again, what the Reagan administration was doing was trying to get an opening there in order to deal with Iran vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. That's the major issue.
Akron, Ohio, go ahead, please.
Morning.
Morning.
I have two quick comments and then a question. First, I'd like to ask C-SPAN to have more international reporters like Christopher Hitchens, because they don't seem to be as tied down by American bias. Second, one of your callers last week said she hunted and finally got the popular vote of Super Tuesday in the Wall Street Journal, which indicated a 2-to-1 vote of Democrats to Republicans. Therefore, it would seem that the USA Today is perhaps not telling the truth in saying that Bush would outvote Dukakis 48% to 42% if Democrats are voting in twice the numbers as Republicans. It seems to be a very fallacious poll.
Caller, let me ask you, do you think that the turnout for the primaries had anything to do with what it would look like in the general election coming in November?
I think that in general, yes, that it's a valid percentage.
Okay, let me ask Wlady to respond to your point.
Well, I didn't quite understand the point.
Well, the point is that in the Super Tuesday voting, 2-to-1 Democratic voters over Republican voters. Therefore, the poll in the USA Today that suggested that George Bush would beat Mike Dukakis is not accurate.
I've heard a lot of talk about sort of questions of arithmetic, that Bush won't have the numbers, won't get out as many voters to vote for Republican as Reagan did. I mean, meaning Reagan was able to appeal to traditionally non-Republican voters to a much larger degree than Bush supposedly will be able to. And I think there's a lot of truth to it. It will depend on what kind of vice presidential nominee Bush has. If it's Jack Kemp, I think he'll be safe.
Chris, your reaction to the numbers game?
She's done better number crunching than I have. I mean, I think I would be very skeptical of any projection into November from the figures so far.
Okay, pegging off on what she said, do these primaries indicate that this will be in your opinion, are there other forces at work in the primaries than there would be in a general election? I mean, the percentages in Florida were like 22% of the eligible voters came out to vote in the general election. The worst case was 53.6, I think, in the last election.
Yes, which is still incredibly low, and I think is the result of the voters feeling that the process is decided before they're asked, that things are all packaged and then presented to them. They're not sovereign in the process.
Americans are famous for having many interests, and a number of people simply aren't interested in politics. They're happy with things the way they are.
Los Angeles, you're next.
I want to welcome Christopher Hitchens, and I hope he stays in the United States, where he's giving expert advice to the American people. Wladyslaw Placzynski made the insulting remark about Jesse Jackson making a, quote, shakedown, unquote, on McDonald's. Well, George Bush, Gephardt, and all the others make shakedowns also, since you like to use that term. That is why there should be campaign reform in this country before it is completely corrupted. It's corrupted now, but before it's completely 100% corrupted, we need complete campaign reform, and I agree with Christopher Hitchens' proposals, and perhaps I would even go further than that, but I think that his proposals are a starting place to go from. And I hope that C-SPAN will have Noam Chomsky on sometime. He's another excellent person.
All right, thank you. We'd be glad to have him on. Reaction?
I'll let him know. Well, thank you very much. What can I say? Nice of you.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that, because it is nice that Mr. Hitchens has a few people out there who agree with him.
One of the towns in Michael Dukakis' life, Haverhill, Massachusetts. Go ahead, please. You're on the air. Just check the button. You're on the air, Haverhill. Go ahead, please.
Okay. I'd like to make a comment about our esteemed, unquote, governor in Massachusetts, Dukakis. He's the biggest fraud that was ever perpetrated upon the people of Massachusetts. And he talks on both sides of his mouth. When he, on one hand, down in the South, he told us we ought to get tough on hijackers, and he can't control his own convicted, vicious, first-degree murderers who he lets out in the street.
Thank you, sir. That's one of our magical violators of our 30-day policy, and he also lies about where he comes from, which is something that we have to put up with here from time to time.
He's a familiar, isn't he?
Well, we have a 30-day policy. People are only allowed to call every 30 days, and then some people call us and tell us that they're from Massachusetts, they're from California, and it throws everybody off, and so we'll go to San Diego. Go ahead, San Diego.
Hi. I'd like to say that, first of all, C-SPAN is the greatest political program I've seen today, and I'd like to compliment Mr. Hitchens on standing up for Mr. Jackson. This is one of the first people I've seen do so. And I'd like to or at least ask the question, how is it that America is